Does your faith break through? Are you one of the few? Oh, are you one of the few?
Well, hello everyone. We want to welcome you to episode 74 of The Few. I'm Bill.
And I'm Ed. And we're excited to be back with you today. And we're going to be talking about leadership as we normally do from a faith-based perspective. And today we're going to be specifically looking at how to lead in different situations. We're going to be exploring situational leadership theory and bringing a little bit of our own experience and some other resources. And we just hope that you have a great time listening. And this is our first time we're releasing our podcast on YouTube. So all of you out there who have listened to our voices, now you get to see our beautiful, beautiful faces.
This is probably gonna crash our listenership. What little bit
this
of
may,
it?
yeah, this may be a short.
Yeah, here we go.
Experiment, as one of our friends always says. I have a face made for radio.
That's right.
So,
That's right.
But we're going to give it a try for those of you out there who like to watch your podcast, or maybe just listen on YouTube as you're cleaning the house or working or whatever you're doing. So we're excited about that. But before we get into the topic for today, Bill, let's get to some
front porch wisdom. I've got a little bit today. Been thinking a lot about this particular episode and what we're going to discuss, and as I was reading one of the leadership books I had on the shelf, actually this was a few weeks ago, they quoted a 19th century Scottish pastor named Thomas Guthrie, and what Thomas said was, I wish I could do a Scottish accent, but I just I can't do it. But Tom,
I've never heard of him. So
yeah, he's not famous, but we're going to make him famous, right? By me using this quote.
Make him famous.
This is what he said. He said, "God has different kinds of work to do, and since He chooses to employ men, He has need of different kinds of instruments." And I've thought about that in light of working as a pastor in a local church and trying to, and we've talked about motivation, but trying to help people see why we're trying to do what we do, and get them encouraged and motivated to act on those things and to do those things. And you realize that not everybody is motivated by or interested in or encouraged by the same thing, and being mindful of not just different personalities, but different giftedness and things like that, and then adjusting the way you deal with people or approach people accordingly is a wise thing. And I think in part that's what he was getting at in that statement, and it connects very well with what we're going to be talking about today.
Yeah, that's exactly the whole idea of situational leadership that we're going to be discussing. So, good wisdom.
So what about you?
Appreciate you sharing. I in the company that I work for, if you're new with us, you may not be aware, but Bill and I both have a little bit of experience in a reverse kind of flip-flopped way, if you will. I spent 27 years in pastoral ministry, and now in addition to still doing things in the church, I work in the business world, and Bill worked in the business world first part of his life and then called into ministry. And so we really are trying to, share things that help people of faith no matter where they lead. One of the things we often say is leadership is not defined by where you lead, but by who you belong to. And so, so we hope you get something out of these conversations. But mine comes from the business world. Actually, the company that I work for, our CEO, challenged us to read a book, and I downloaded it on Kindle. And don't do that if you get this book, because it's just a picture book. It's some guy that draws little pictures and then writes little words there, and so it's not very
sounds like
friendly
it might
for
meet my IQ.
Yeah, it's an easy read, believe me. So anyways, the book is called, and I have to pull it up here on my computer so I don't get it wrong, The Boy, the Mole, the Fox, and the Horse. Some of you may be aware of this, and the author of that book is Charles Mackesy, Mackesy. I apologize, Charles or Charlie, if I'm pronouncing your name wrong, but it does have some neat little wisdom in it. And so the horse is the wise character in the book, and the boy is going through some things, and the boy asks the horse at one point in the book, "What is the bravest thing you've ever said?" And the horse replies, "Help." And so I thought that's kind of cool, because really, honestly, one of the things we talk about a lot on here is vulnerability and vulnerability-based trust. And the fact is so many people in leadership feel like they can't ask for help.
Right.
They feel like they need to have all the answers. And I would just say for wisdom today for all of us is you don't have to have all the answers. As a matter of fact, all of us at some point, usually more than not, need to ask for help. And so don't be bashful about
Right.
that. That's how we learn. That's how we grow. So that's the wisdom for the day.
I'll take it.
So,
There's a lot. I think
Okay.
a lot of us, and I'm sure it's probably the same in the business world, but in the church world, there are a lot of pastors that are afraid to be transparent or to acknowledge that I don't know what to do, or I'm not sure what to do. To me, it was a big step for me to figure out how to be okay with acknowledging that I don't have all the answers, but then finding ways
Right.
to do so, not from a position of weakness, like, help, I'm desperate, but from a position of we can figure this out together when
Right.
like my background, my experience, my knowledge coupled with yours and yours and yours, and
Yes.
God working in the midst of our team can make it happen.
Yeah, and I don't think it is any different, Bill. Really, in the business world, in the church world, I think it's just a human thing. When we get positions and we get roles, and we're defined as leaders by the people who put us in those roles, I think one of the natural things is we think we are supposed to be the experts. We are supposed to be the ones that have the answers, right? And we've talked about this on many of our podcasts about the idea of, not trying to be the expert, but just trying to be real and authentic and helping people move along on their journey from point A to point B. We always talk about moving from point A to point B. And so I think that this is normal, and I know I've done it. I mean, there have been times, the people that I work with, one of my colleagues, one of her sayings is, "Don't sit idle on the struggle bus," and I've used that over and over and over again since I heard her say that one time. Don't sit idle on the struggle bus, and so many of us do that.
Yep.
And it's not a bad reflection on your leadership if you ask for help. As a matter of fact, it's a good reflection on your leadership, I think, if you admit, I don't know the answer, but I will do all I can to try to find that answer. Together we'll work and try to find that answer together as a team. That just builds a lot of trust on a team, and it's effective leadership. So,
I don't think I've ever been the smartest person in the room, so I always I learned the hard way. Look for help.
Look for help and take it when
I
it's offered.
definitely am not the smartest person in the room, so I'm going to look for those who are.
Well, you're the only person in your room.
Yeah,
right
so
now,
I guess I'm okay right now. I've cornered the market today, this morning.
And I'm the smartest person in my room, and together, hopefully nobody comes visiting. Then we'll lose that. We'll lose that mantle.
Well, let's talk about situational
all right,
leadership.
Let's do. Would you like to start, or would you like me to start?
Why don't you go ahead and give the introduction?
Okay. Well, we're titling this episode something like, leading under different circumstances, or leading differently for different situations. I think it's one thing that oftentimes we as leaders forget. Probably the best place that we see this happening is in sports. Most of us at some point, if we've been involved in sports at all, we've heard somebody say, you can't coach everybody the same way, right?
Yeah.
And usually that is just boiled down to two very simple methodologies of coaching. And one is being aggressive and hollering and screaming and getting down on people, and the others being more encouraging and more uplifting. And people say, well, some people respond if you hammer them hard, and some people respond if you take a light touch with them, right? And I think that's true. And so really situational leadership that we're looking at today is an actual model. It's a theory. The history of it is the fact that it was developed, and I'm going to pull up some notes here because that's what we do here on the podcast. We regurgitate everybody else's stuff and try to talk it through, and I don't want to get this wrong. But basically, situational leadership was developed by two folks, and they were working together in leadership. One is Paul Hersey, and the other is Ken Blanchard. And they co-wrote a book years ago called The Management of Organizational Behavior, where they developed this situational leadership model. And the basis, just the very simple basis of it, is that you analyze and assess the person you're leading, and you analyze and assess the situation in which you're leading them in, and then you change your leadership as they change their development along this kind of curve or along this kind of path. Yep. What we're going to talk about specifically today, though, is kind of the second iteration of this, and that is Ken Blanchard and Hersey kind of split off, and Hersey developed what is commonly referred to as the SL2 model, and he changed a little bit of the original situational leadership theory model, and you can go back and you can Google this, you can read these books. But some of you out there in the faith-based world, some of you who are followers of Christ, may be familiar with Ken Blanchard because Ken Blanchard is the guy that wrote Lead Like Jesus and has the Lead Like Jesus organization. And the story with Ken Blanchard, and I'm not real familiar with the story, but I know this much, is back when he was working with Hersey and when they developed situational leadership, he was not a follower of Christ. And later in life, he became a Christian and basically said, hey, you know what, all this situational leadership I've worked on my life really is the way that the Bible lifts up leadership. It's really the way that Jesus led. Mm-hmm. And so he writes this book called Lead Like Jesus, which is pretty popular, and that's where some of you might know the name from. But we're really looking specifically at the situational leadership 2 model, the SL2 model. Just change some wording and a little bit.
And just a quick correction. You Blanchard is the one who developed SL2, right? It's Blanchard, yes. And you misspoke and said Hersey. So is actually Blanchard that did develop this second iteration using your word.
Yeah. So see, you are the smartest person.
No,
when you're with me.
No. But just quick. But what we're talking about today is when Blanchard went back and did his own thing with it. He developed the SL2 model, and that's what we're going to be looking at today. But it was Blanchard.
Right. And one more note before we kind of dive into the model itself. One more note is a lot of times Dwight D. Eisenhower is kind of given credit for the basis of this model because he was known as such a situational leader. He led different in different situations, and so loosely a lot of this model is built upon his leadership style, and they've just kind of brought it down into something that's a little more manageable, a little more understandable, with nice little charts and graphs that you can look up, and you can Google those, and there's some really neat charts that help you follow along.
And really, I think this is in many ways common sense leadership. Right. I coached middle school basketball for a few years, and I had here's a good word, temerity, to get a guy who was retired.
What's that mean?
I'm not sure, but I think it's the right word. The good sense to recruit a guy who had retired from coaching middle school basketball and had been in our county. He had been the county champion 16 out of 32 years he coached. So that's a pretty good average. And so I brought him on board, and I was the head coach on paper, but in reality I just did crowd control and he did the coaching, and just learned from him. And what was so cool was to watch. He had really, I think, mastered with these middle school athletes situational leadership. Mm-hmm. just
Right.
watching him work with each one of those kids and how he went about doing it and the way he motivated different ones, it was a model for what we're going to be talking about. But anyway, um,
Okay. Well, temerity means excessive confidence or boldness.
well, then I probably used it
Audacity.
wrong.
No one had the context is no one had the temerity to question his conclusions.
Well,
So maybe he was a bold
he
coach.
was.
So that's good. That's good. So, yeah, well, I really like this model, and I agree with you. I think it is a lot common sense. But when you go through, the thing where it really came alive to me was thinking in terms of how often you can default back into just kind of what your leadership style is. And so basically to just give an opening on the model itself, there's 4 quadrants. And it looks at, it's kind of defined, number one, by the person and the situation that you're in. So in other words, if I am going to go under someone's leadership to preach sermons, okay, which I've done a lot of, then the person who is leading me would look at me and say, okay, the situation that I'm trying to do, I'm trying to lead them from point A to point B in developing sermons, right? So this person starts as underdeveloped as a person, or the model starts underdeveloped, like I have no experience, I'm brand new at this, clear over to fully developed into preaching
Right.
sermons. And kind of go through 4 quadrants, and so the person leading me assesses me and says, okay, this guy actually has 0 experience at preaching sermons. So as we begin our relationship in this kind of leadership situation, they're going to be much more instructional, much more directive. Even I think what we often look at, and we've talked about on the podcast, is micromanaged. We say, well, micromanagement's a bad thing, but the fact is sometimes
Yes.
people need to be micromanaged. And when they're brand new and they have no idea what they're doing, then you really can't kick into this coaching or this delegating kind of thing because they don't have a clue what they're doing. So you start out, if that person is in that first quadrant, you start out with that whole idea of more directing, and like I said, micromanaging is a bad term, but directing, telling people what they need to do, those sorts of things. And so now the important thing to realize is that if if somebody's working with me to preach sermons, this is going to be probably a temeritus, if that's a word, temeritus statement. But the fact is, I'm probably over in quadrant 4 on preaching sermons, so they're going to skip clear over to the quadrant 4. But if they're teaching me to crochet, then they have to start in quadrant 1. So it's not just, you don't just assess who you're working with, but you assess what you're actually trying to help them do or become. So I may be, a person that you may lead me completely differently if you're teaching me to preach sermons than if you're teaching me to crochet.
Right.
So I think that, to me, that was kind of the aha moment out of this model. Was it's not just I look at Bill Brown and I think, okay, what kind of, like in that coaching situation, what kind of leadership should I utilize to help Bill move forward? But it really is, what am I trying to help Bill accomplish? And that comes into play as
Right.
well.
It's a combination of assessing the person and their personality, what they bring into the table, but also the situation you're putting them in, because they may actually need absolutely no direction in something that you require of them, like the example you give. But then
Right.
they may have absolutely no clue on something else that's expected of them in the same job. And
Yeah.
hindsight, for me, some of the mistakes that I've made as a leader, in leading others or teams of people is, for me, I'm more naturally in one of the other levels. I'm not a real directive person. I don't,
Right.
I'm not driven to tell people what to do, or I tell people
Right.
I'm not capable of micromanaging. I'm just not that detail
Right.
oriented.
Right.
And so my
Right.
default a lot of times I think leads to a poor onboarding process with new people. I mean, because I'm not
Right.
as directive maybe as I should be, but initially I think
Right.
when we're beginning to work with people, we have to begin with this directive level in terms of figuring out where they are, and until we are certain that both their skills and their their well, that they know what they're doing and knowing it well and can be and be more self-directed. We have to be hands-on,
Right.
and I've failed at that in the past with different people, no doubt about it.
Yeah. Yeah. And you know what? Another kind of aspect that Blanchard talks about in this first quadrant that you have to pay attention to, that I think is really important for us to listen to, is because you kind of reference it when you talk about new hires, right? Mm-hmm. When you have someone who's brand new at something and you know you're going to have to be doing the kind of directing piece, you have to also understand that most people who go into something new are super, super excited, right? And if they're normal humans, they already think they know how to do it well. So how many of us out there who are pastors, when we first went into ministry, we were going to change the world, right? I mean, and we knew exactly what we were going to do. We knew exactly how we were going to do it, right? So you have to be careful, because you as a leader, you know, if you're in a mentor-mentee relationship or whatever it happens to be, maybe you're the supervisor, you have to understand that this person really may not think they need that direction. And so I think a very important part in this first quadrant is to sit down and have a very open conversation about how I'm going to lead you in this first 6 months. And to say, you know, I know you're excited, and I know you have a lot of good ideas, but there's going to be a lot of directing going on, a lot of information sharing, a lot of one-on-one, some intense kind of leadership stuff, because you are brand new at this, right? And to try to help the person understand that they are brand new and they need to learn as much as they can, because a lot of times they have a high level of confidence, is I think the way Blanchard says it in this quadrant.
Yeah, and that certainly was true of my first 3 months in pastoral ministry. You know, I mean,
only 3 months.
Yeah, the first 3 months in, it was like, wow, I can't believe I'm getting paid to do this. Even
some people get a little longer than 3 months.
Yeah, for the first 3 months, it was like, wow, I can't believe I'm getting paid to do this. And then reality began to sink in, and not everybody thought my ideas were so wonderful, you know. But I didn't. Right. The difference was I didn't have in our context. There was nobody to direct. There was, you know.
Well,
there wasn't, you know.
Yes. And I think that's a word that we should stop and talk about for just a minute, because, you know, we are trying to appeal to pastors out there and business leaders alike. I think in the business world there's a much better chance that you're going to have someone who's responsible for your success, right? Especially as you go new into a place. In the church world, very often, you know, if you're going to a church where you're the only pastor, and you're the lead pastor, you're going to walk in and you're not going to have that opportunity. Right. So I don't know, Bill. Give us some ideas or some wisdom on what you think a person in that situation should do.
Well, I think if you can find a mentor or a coach who's walked that journey before, I mean, like some of what we do at Renew is try to help younger pastors. And when I say younger pastors, I mean pastors who are newer at what they're doing, because not all new pastors are young. You know, there's a lot of second career folks that are out there, and but in fact, when we're finished today, I'm going to be having a first conversation with a fellow who's a pastor who, you know, we have a mutual friend, and this mutual friend said, you know, this guy, he came here from out of town, has been here 2 years, he feels like he's alone. And I think he could just use a friend. Would you give him a call? And so I'm going to go meet with him. But I think when you find yourself in that situation, you have to be careful to make sure that you identify or find some people that can help you walk through. It'd be great to have someone in the congregation that you're serving that is trustworthy, that can give you that can help you get a head start on all the background and all the detail of stuff, how things normally have worked around here, what things looked like in the past. Not that you have to do it that way, but so that you know and you don't step on landmines unnecessarily. You know, exactly. There are some sacred things to people that you would never dream are sacred until you step on them and find out otherwise. You know.
Yeah. Well, and tell me if you agree. My experience is, if we're looking at this first kind of quadrant as this brand new, you know, needing the directive kind of leadership, most people don't ask for help until the second quadrant. And when all this stuff happens. And so, I would say out to churches out there, if you're out there and you're involved in a church and you have any kind of authority in hiring your pastor or onboarding the pastor, mandate that pastor has someone. Mandate that they have a mentor, that they have someone who they can go to is helping them out, because typically we won't seek that out ourselves when we're in this first quadrant, because we have this overconfidence, we have this excitement, we have this enthusiasm. But then what happens is we move into that second quadrant and we start to realize we don't know how to do all of this, right? And I think some words, some descriptive words there are: we feel lost, we feel alone, we feel like we're failing. And so we have basically in that first quadrant, we have a low competence and a high confidence. So we have low confidence and a high competence. We move into the second quadrant, we have a little bit higher competence, but we have lower confidence. And so what Blanchard says then is, as leaders, then we need to start coaching. This is when we there's still some directing going on. Obviously, there's overlap in all of these, but our primary mode of working with this person then becomes coaching, which is that questioning, encouraging, all those kinds of things,
and the supportive aspects of coming alongside somebody, encouraging them that what you're doing is the right thing. You're headed in the right direction. Keep pursuing this. Don't let the opposition or those that are kind of naysayers, don't let them discourage you too greatly. Go in it with your eyes wide open, but keep going. This is to be expected. And I think I was blessed in that first pastorate that I had to have, in our system, we have area ministers who are like pastors to pastors in the local church. And the area minister that served at that time in my area where I began, he did a great job of watching out for me. I mean, he called me every month. He stopped by regularly, and he was calling me every month. How you doing? Where's this at? And he really kept his fingers on the pulse of where I was. He knew I was green. He knew I was as green as grass, when it came to leading a church. And he really was. He was somewhat directive. He was, pretty highly directive. You need to think about this. You need to think about this. You need to think about this. But then he was encouraging me. Look at what's going on, and look how this is turning. Look how God's using you, and how things are changing and improvement. And who'd have thought that so and so? Look where he is right now. So things like that. A lot of that encouragement that I was beginning is like, my bubble was burst, and I was needing to figure out how to get it reinflated, and he was doing that for me. I mean, that's an awkward image, but that's basically where I was, and that's the coaching that's that second phase.
And I think most people, hear you and feel you on that. I think if you're looking for, if you're trying to really differentiate these, I go back to my crocheting. Again, if you were teaching me to crochet, and I came in and I bought the equipment. I don't even know what you have to buy to crochet: yarn and a little crochet thing, whatever those are called, a hook. So, or knitting. Those are the big needles. Those are the big long needles, right? So I would go buy the equipment, and I could think to myself, you know what? I'm really excited. I'm going to make an Afghan, and it's going to be beautiful, and it's going to be great. And then I start, and I realize, no, I'm not very good at this. And so if you're going to really teach me in that first quadrant, you're going to tell me this is how you do it. Put this hook here, pull this yarn here, do this, right? Once I get to that second quadrant, I'm a little more humble probably. I realize I'm not very good at this. I have a little more competence because I've learned a little bit as you've directed me. Now you start using coaching methodology. So instead of telling me, put the yarn here, do this, you might say to me, well, what do you think you should do? Right? How would you do this? Because inside I have the competence to answer those questions now and figure it out on my own. And so that's the change from the direction to the coaching. Rather than just teaching and saying this is how to do it, Now it becomes, how do you think you should do it? How are you going to approach it as an individual differently than maybe the way I approach it? So those are the coaching things that come into play kind of in that second quadrant. Right. And then what's next after that?
The third quadrant is what, from the leadership style, is the supporting quadrant. And the kind of people that we're working with in that situation are what Blanchard describes as capable but cautious contributors. They need the supporting style, which is there's not a whole lot of direction that's necessary. Not a whole lot of directive behavior is required, but right. You do provide significant support as their supervisor. Work along with them as they do their thing that they're capable of doing quite well, but helping them gain confidence in that, I guess, is the way I would look at it.
Yeah, the confidence goes up some in this third quadrant, and the competence goes up. And so you're starting on this journey of being fully developed in this thing that you're doing, right? Mm-hmm. And so at this point, you don't need to be asking a lot of coaching questions. You don't need a lot of one-on-one meetings. You don't need a lot of personal interaction. It's just make sure you're still there as a leader to support these people. You begin to trust. We've talked a lot about Covey's trust on the competence and the character piece. And you begin to trust their competence and their character that they can do this, and you let them do it. Right. You begin to let them do it, but you always have that support, right? I'm not good at that. That's not natural to me, but I realize how important it is. I mean, these are the things where you need to be sending cards. You need to be picking up the phone, just saying, "How you doing with this? Is there anything I can do to help you on this?" And I tend to just kind of forget to do those things at times. I have to be reminded often. If I've spent a lot of time with people in the directive stage and more time in the coaching stage, once they get to the supportive stage, I have a tendency to kind of walk away. And you can't do that as a leader. You need to stay engaged, stay making sure that you are supporting, encouraging, being that person where that person never feels alone. They don't feel like they're doing this on their own. They still have help.
And you in your defense, you did that for me, like in the discipleship role that I had when I was on staff with you at South Parkersburg Baptist. When we transitioned Sunday school and the whole worship, the Sunday morning model. Remember when we transitioned from, we were doing three services and 2 Sunday schools or something like that. And we were transitioning we were going to transition to Sunday school and worship on consecutive hours, people basically just trading places. And you let me lead that transition. I had to present the idea to people, get their input, and let me lead the town hall meetings where we tried to answer questions and present the case for why this makes sense for us, for where we're at right now. And really, I was very cautious about it because I know there were some people, change is hard for everybody. But there were some people that weren't fans of the idea at all, but it was my job to try to help them see it otherwise. And I don't like conflict. I'm conflict averse. So I was definitely cautious, but you handed that to me, and you and Lloyd coached me through that process, and it was a great learning experience for me that I've used and has helped me a lot in the time since then. But you were there supporting when I was feeling a little stuck. There was always, I don't know, an encouraging word or a little bit of guidance that I really was feeling to give me a little bit more confidence that what I was doing and the way we were going about it was the right thing. So you have done this. So kudos to you there. Giving you a pat on the back that you were hard on yourself there, but you actually did practice this with me.
Well, I have done it, and I still try to do it, but it's not natural for me to do. I'm not an encourager, I guess is my point. My point is, and we've shared that on podcasts before, we don't need to do it again, but I have to be disciplined to encourage. And it's not because I don't want to. It's because it simply leaves my mind. I simply keep my mind on the things I'm engaged in closest, and it's the directing and the coaching stuff. But then when there's someone over here doing their thing, it's easy for me to just kind of shut that off and just work on this stuff and not really pay attention to what's going on over
Yeah.
here. And so you have to be disciplined that. And then the next section, same thing, right? Because at the next section, you really are hands off. You are. This is the person is completely developed. I now know how to crochet well. You've seen what I do. And you can simply say, hey, we need a really nice blanket crocheted by December the 10th, and you don't have to worry about it, right? You're just gonna trust that by December the 10th, you're gonna have this beautiful work of art. Do you crochet blankets or Afghans?
When I was in kindergarten, my kindergarten teacher taught us all how to knit, and we knitted potholders for our parents for Christmas.
Oh, wow.
But I haven't knitted
Wow.
since kindergarten, so I really don't know how to knit or crochet. I will say that.
Some of you, I kind of think maybe we don't have a lot of crocheters or knitters in our audience. But if you are, you might send us some help on this language we're using. But anyways, I play the ukulele, I'm horrible musician kind of person. I'm not musical at all. And so I've been working on this for 5 years, so I could go right down through these whole quadrants in playing the ukulele. And I'm nowhere close yet to you saying to me, hey, we need you to go play the ukulele for this group on December the 10th. There's no way that I can do that. And so some people never will get here. This is maybe in the one task you're trying to help them do or the one situation. They just never will develop the competence. And that's where you start to have to talk about what your calling really is and all those kinds of things. But the people who do, it's just a delegation thing. You don't need a lot of hands-on. You still want to be that encourager. You still want to be there for them, that they're on the team, those sorts of things. But you can completely delegate it, completely trust that it's going to get done.
I was really impressed with my wife when she transitioned jobs a couple of years ago. And the job that she moved into required a high degree of, there were just so many things that she had to know. It was an HR position in a government job, and I don't know how many people know it, but the government has created so many rules and regulations on how hires are to take place so that it's fair for every possible sect of people in our society, that the hiring process is very complicated. And they created, she, a year and a half in, she still didn't know all the rules. And she was still with a mentor. There was someone who was keeping a close eye on her. But the onboarding process that they did, in hindsight, looks a lot like this situational leadership model. Initially, it was extremely directive. There was nothing that she did by herself. There was nothing that she did her own way. She didn't organize her work. They said, do this, do this, do this, do this. And all of the work that she did was checked by a mentor who was assigned to her. Nothing left her computer to go anywhere else. It didn't first go through the mentor. And if it was wrong, it wasn't considered to be her fault. It was considered to be the one directing the behavior. And then from that, they transitioned to, that phase that we would call more of a coaching phase, where it's still pretty directive, but yet she was she had a little bit more liberty, but was still receiving good support. And so it was just neat to see that onboarding process handled as well as it was, and it really brought me under conviction as I've thought about the ways. It's not like I work at a mega church. I serve a church that has 3 additional full-time staff, two additional full-time staff members, and then some support part-time staff. So it's not like I'm in charge of this, massive employment force, workforce. But it convicted me seeing how well they planned the onboarding process, of how poorly I have brought new staff on board under my leadership, and how that needs to change, and how it could be improved readily, simply by listening to Blanchard on these things and being aware, and sitting down with this new hire, let's say, and say, okay, this you may know everything that you need that will make you perform well in this position, but when we're getting started, here's how this is going to go. I'm going to tell you what I want you to do, and we're going to do that. And as you learn our way and what's actually going on here, and I feel that you're competent or that you know the job, well, then we'll become less directive and walk them
Right.
through that. And I think it just would be so much more effective. And it has really motivated me to be much more proactive in the next position that we
Yeah.
fill here in terms of helping that person thrive, by being
Right.
mindful of both them as a person, but also the situation that they're in and where they are.
Right. Yeah, that's where this starts. I don't know how much we talked about this before, but really this is where it starts as kind of an assessment, right? It's a diagnosis or an assessment. You have to spend the time to try to figure out where is this person and in relationship to this situation we're asking them to do, this thing we're asking them to do. And I would say you're spot on with the onboarding, and this is huge for onboarding, but also I think for our listeners, don't forget this also for someone who's been there for 5 years, but you're asking them to do something new. That's where you can often miss the importance of this situational stuff because you think to yourself, this is a great staff person. I can delegate everything to them and they can take care of this, but you might be asking them to do something they've never done before. And so in that situation, you need to assess, is this person, does this person need a lot more direction? Do they need to start back at quadrant one, or do we need to start at quadrant two or quadrant three? And that's not always easy to do, but it's something I think to be really thinking about, because the fact is that it would help all of us, who are being led, and all of us who are leaders, if we just follow this model a little more, especially when we're new hires or we're doing something new.
Yeah, adjusting responsibilities or modifying job descriptions a little bit.
Right. Exactly. So, well, Bill, I think we've talked through this quite a bit. Do you have anything else to add to our faithful listeners out there before we check out for today?
No, just I think the biggest thing would just be to encourage one another with. I think there are things that all of us can learn as leaders that help us be more effective. The question or the challenge is actually doing the things that we learn. We read books, we go to seminars, but the challenge is translating it into real life and actually doing it, and having the discipline to do so. And I look at this, and what I find encouraging about this model is that you don't have to be a brilliant leader. You don't have to be a type A personality. You don't, any personality type, anybody could practice these things that are here. And so,
Right.
so whether or not other people think you have the personality of a leader, you can practice these things and actually lead effectively. And so this to me was encouraging, but also reviewing this again and revisiting it just reminds me of the importance of handling change of leadership that you're over which you have authority or whatever that you're responsible for. You really need to pay attention. This model would would avoid a lot of pain for both the leader that is coming in and the leader that's responsible for the one he or she's just hired.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good word. And I think from a Christian perspective, for our audience, go back and read that original book, by the two fellas, and then go read Lead Like Jesus from Blanchard. Put all this kind of together. But you can go out on Google and you can find this model. There's a really neat picture with 4 quadrants, and it tells you, your how you address the person in each one, and then from the person's perspective, how they're developing through each one as well. There's much more to the model than what we've shared today, but I think it's just it's a very intuitive kind of thing. You don't have to look at a chart every time. Once you start getting kind of in the hang of doing things this way, you just start to ask the question, where is this person at? and how do I need to lead them as a result based on this particular thing that I'm asking them to do. And I think it's very simple, but it can change the success of the people you lead tremendously based on this. And if you jump over to the coaching before you go through the direction, you're going to have aggravated employees that are going to not stay long. If you jump over to the third quadrant, when they're really, back at one, same thing. But also, if you're trying to direct people who are at the level of being delegated to, that's going to be frustrating. So some of the problems you're facing right now as a leader might be fixed if you kind of move to a different quadrant in the way you lead a person who may be frustrated with your leadership at this point. So.
Good word.
Good stuff. And again, for all of you out there who may be watching us for the first time on YouTube, or for those of you who listen to us on all of your favorite podcast platform, just to let you know, we are on YouTube now. We're on the Few channel, so if you search for us on YouTube, you should be able to find us and share us around so people can listen. But other than that, we appreciate all of you and pray that you continue to lead in a way that honors and glorifies God, no matter whether you're in the boardroom or in the sanctuary or in the nonprofit or coaching your football team or leading your family or whatever it is. We are here to help you with all things leadership from a faith-based perspective.
And we want you to be
How's that?
One of the few. How about that? That's good right there.
One of the few.
Does your faith break through? Are you one of the few? Oh, are you one of the few?